No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, and happy Brexit Day. Despite what all of those people in the establishment and the MSM tell you, I have no regrets whatsoever. Imagine today being dragged by the EU at a moment's notice, being controlled by the globalists, having our free speech curtailed. Sovereignty is everything. It's everything. Now, look, I will admit, our leaders have made a complete mess of the greatest opportunity we ever had. But I refuse to lose hope. You know that's why I fight for change every single day. And today, this Friday, this Brexit Day, the fight goes on, with the king of Brexit, Nigel Farage, reacting in fury to Labour's anti-democratic plan to cancel elections and Priti Patel's unrepentant mass immigration rant.
But I'm pretty angry. This denial of our democracy is something that is fundamentally un-British, anti-British, it's undemocratic, and it shows how rotten the whole system is now in British politics. There is no doubt in my mind, when you look at it, that Britain is broken.
In my digest next, why Farage is right that the whole system is rotten and needs to be repaired urgently, which means being brave and bold. Then my superstar panel weigh in, and what a day to have him. James Glancy, the British TV star, conservationist and former Brexit Party MEP, and Mayuran Senthilnathan, a rising star of Farage's Reform UK. Also coming up on the show today, Piers Morgan trying to rewrite his COVID legacy, but Bev Turner isn't having any of it.
Piers Morgan, if you genuinely are now more sceptical, more curious, give me a call. You know you can get my number. I can tell you stuff about the last 4 years that will blow your tiny mind. Let's see how curious you really are.
That's quite a challenge. I'll show you what prompted that response, what Piers had to say to Tucker Carlson, Bev's full takedown, and also June Slater weighs in too. JD Vance, the US Vice President, destroys Rory Stewart in an epic takedown of the rest is politics. You're really not going to believe that full extraordinary exchange. And here's a question for you. Was a taxi driver right to refuse this woman a lift in his vehicle, even though he was very worried that the car was going to be damaged? We're going to debate the thorny issue of the rights of the morbidly obese later in the show. Then, in the Uncancelled Aftershow on Substack, even Netflix now roasting Prince Harry and Meghan. Our Royal Mastermind Angela Levin is here with the latest on a very awkward development for the troubled ex-royals. www.outspoken.live is where you sign up. Now, you know this week I've been incredibly excited about the return of Greatest Britain Union Jackass. I've loved it, actually. And we vote live Monday to Thursday for the contenders. Then something different on a Friday to end the week. I've always wanted to do this. Who is the worst Briton in the world this week? It is a mega poll. It launches on Thursday night. You can vote now. And goodness, at last count, I think we had something like 34,000 votes. So this is amazing. This is the great thing about this YouTube community. We're going to do it every Friday to find out the worst Britain in the world. But just a reminder, the nominees, because they come from your Union Jackasses throughout the week: Keir Slippery Starmer, David Loomy Lanny, Rachel from Accounts Reeves, and Peter Mandelson. I will reveal the worst Britain in the world at the end of the show. But now, let's go. On the day that marks 5 years since Brexit, the biggest democratic vote in our history that the political establishment did everything they could to try and undermine, it is very unsurprising that another democratic threat is now taking place and coming to the forefront, because it is being led by our now Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, the hater and wrecker-in-chief, who for years advocated ignoring the democratic will of the British people to leave the European Union. Now this evil bastard is cancelling local elections, terrified of the Reform UK threat that is going to destroy him eventually, trust me. But Brexit King Nigel Farage is making it clear he won't take this bull from slippery Starmer lying down.
I simply could not believe the rumour when I heard that the Labour government, despite any manifesto commitment, want to completely change the shape of local government, and that is now being used by the Conservative Party, who in fact run most of the county councils, as a reason to cancel the elections. No, I'm not making it up. Over half of the county councils in Britain have said, because these changes are coming, we want the elections cancelled on May the 1st. It looks like about 10 million of you who would have had the right to vote on that day will not be able to. I think this is absolutely monstrous. We haven't heard a big debate about it because both Labour and the Conservatives agree. They are terrified of the rise of reform. They know just how well we're going to do on May the 1st, and they've cancelled the elections in many of our strongest areas. Well, I promise you, we will fight those that are still up. We will do well, but I'm pretty angry. This denial of our democracy is something that is fundamentally un-British, anti-British, it's undemocratic, and it shows how rotten the whole system is now in British politics. There is no doubt in my mind, when you look at it, that Britain is broken.
Oh, well, it absolutely is. But it's not just Labour's anti-democratic communist madness that has seen reform storm into the lead in the national polls, because I really believe the tectonic plates of British politics are shifting. And that is partly going to be increased. And certainly this change will be emphasised by a new car crash interview from the former Home Secretary Priti Patel, who just shows no understanding of the damage her party has caused. And as a result, it has gone viral. And Farage is using it to his advantage, posting on X, the Conservative Party are proud of their disastrous record on immigration and would do it again. Please share this video far and wide. And it really is worth watching and breaking down, so let's do it.
But there's also been some downsides since.
Tell me.
Well, let's have a look at the graph. Net migration.
Yeah.
Look at that. That was on your watch. Where exactly on that graph were you the Home Secretary in charge of Britain?
So, well, we should first of all recognise that we ended free movement.
Yeah, you ended free movement for Europeans and you threw the borders open to the rest of the world, and the graph...
We always said that in Brexit, Harry.
No, come on. That is not fair.
So,
you did not say we're going to hit 1.2 million net migrants.
No, we did not say that.
Allow 1.2 million people into the country.
So let me finish.
In 1 year.
So let me finish. Brightest and the best come into our country. People on skilled work visas.
Is that the brightest and the best?
We've always said, well, look at it's legal migration, Harry. It's legal. People who come here and work and contribute to our economy.
Doesn't mean it's
brightest
right.
and the best. Look at the points-based immigration system. For the first time ever, Harry, let me give you some facts.
Go on.
For the first time ever, we have a points-based immigration system, counting people in and out. You can turn off the immigration system at any stage in terms of what our economy needs and doesn't need. You know, the government should have done more, absolutely, on skills and training Brits.
Did every one of those 1.2 million people that flooded into the country in the last 3 years, did they need to come here?
So what would you say to the Ukrainians that are in our country?
I would say that's 300,000.
I mean, it's insane. There's more, but let me just show you quickly what Reform UK's Rupert Lowe had to say about that. The Tories did not allow the best and brightest in their mass immigration splurge. They welcomed hundreds of thousands of low-skilled migrants who don't properly contribute, integrate, or often even speak English. I won't ever forgive the Conservative Party, and nor should you. But that car crash interview got worse.
Came here through
Come on, you're
conflict
fudging
and all
the
rest of
numbers
it.
there.
I'm not fudging the numbers, I'm telling you now.
300,000 Ukrainians on a temporary fix is not 1.2 million people coming to this country to take jobs that you promised were going to go to sun readers and people who voted
Those
for Brexit.
are skilled visas, Harry. We made it quite clear. These are people that work, you know, skilled visa routes, all the skills in terms of NHS, people that are working in our National
That
Health
old
Service. We
chestnut.
had something called a pandemic. You remember health and social
You're fine
care
with that
visas
graph?
as well. I'm not fine with it. I haven't said
Would you like
that.
to apologise to all the people
I
that
have
voted
not.
Brexit for the fact that you misled them in saying we're
I
going to
did
take
not
back control of
mislead
our
them.
borders, and then you threw them open
That's
and
not
let in
true.
millions of
That
people?
is totally distortionary, and that's not true. And to be quite frank, we made it quite clear it'd be people from the rest of the world, people with skills, based on our economy. And I think people should apologise for those who are saying that actually...
You would like an apology?
People in the pandemic came here, health and social care visas. What would have happened to our NHS? Are we now saying, are you and others saying we don't need those people in our NHS?
The NHS is being overwhelmed because of our immigration numbers. But look, an important fact check from Outspoken contributor Connor Tomlinson. He said Priti Patel is just lying. Doctors and nurses comprise less than 3% of the visa issues since she changed immigration laws in 2021. Only 5% of visas each year are given to likely net taxpayers. A study of 70,000 health and social care visas issued between July 2022 to 2023 found 11,000 vacancies were filled. They didn't fill vacant positions and were outnumbered by dependents. The gaslighting is unreal, and the unwanted economic, cultural, and demographic change visited upon our country is unforgivable. And let me just say, the reaction to that interview has been one of horror for those who somehow think the Tories can turn it all around. Let me take you through it. Rachel Wolf, she just said simply, "This is one of the most catastrophic political interviews I have ever seen." Mike Jones broke it down a little bit more, writing, "Is Kemi Badenoch facing a full-blown crisis after Patel's interview? Short answer, yes. No question about it. First, this is a total narrative shift for the Tories on immigration, moving from hesitant contrition to an outright, unapologetic defence of bad policy. That alone makes it a crisis. But it's also a personal disaster for Kemi, whose decision to bring Patel into her shadow cabinet now looks like staggeringly poor judgment. Most of the British people won't see this clip, but plenty of people will. The big parties, the journalists, the strategists, and right now they'll be sharpening their pens and keyboards getting ready to tear into it." I mean, interestingly, it was left to Suella Braverman, who was one of Priti's following, she succeeded Priti, sorry, is what I'm trying to say, as Home Secretary, who wrote, "The British people do not owe us an apology. The last Conservative government failed to lower immigration despite promises to do so. I tried, but was repeatedly blocked by the Cabinet. Every one of us in the Conservative Party has only one thing to say about our record on immigration: sorry." But Matt Goodwin was having none of that, simply stating, "I don't know about you, but I will never vote Tory again." And the new data shows Priti, and this is damning, would be booted from her Essex seat in a turquoise wave. And according to the projections there, Labour would lose over half their seats, that's across the country, and almost all of Essex would turn turquoise. So politics, as usual, is over, which might mean we can eventually get a real Brexit. Now, the Superstar panel. And it's so great to have them both back for the first time in 2025. Conservationist TV presenter James Glancy and Mayuran Senthilnathan, a rising star for Reform UK. But James Glancy, you were, of course, a Brexit Party MEP. You worked with Nigel Farage to get us out. And I think without the Brexit Party, we might still be in the European Union some way. Do you agree with him on this fifth Brexit day that Britain is broken?
I mean, 100% broken. There were so many issues that you've highlighted that show that it's broken. Let's start with the immigration issue. Now, the Conservative Party, half of them agree, or a small number of them agree. The Robert Jenrick wing agrees that immigration is out of control and something needs to be done. But I would say a large number of them, if not a majority, plan to do this with immigration, and they believe in integration, and immigration is something that's part and parcel of the Conservative Party. And we've seen that since David Cameron was elected as part of the coalition. They said they would reduce immigration, and they did the exact opposite. What I don't understand is if they really want to get back into power or they want to revive their poll numbers, why they're not saying we made a mistake and we're going to correct it. And what correct it means is too many people have come here, they can't stay. We will revoke those visas. We will reform indefinite leave to remain, which means if you've been here for 5 years, you can then apply for indefinite leave to remain and remain here forever and claim benefits. They're not saying any of that. They're accepting it as, oh, that happened in the past and will reduce numbers in the future. So there is no understanding within the party of the damage they've done. And a certain element like Priti Patel believes they did the right thing. And I think you need to go back to Boris Johnson. When he was mayor, he tried to force through an amnesty for, at the time, they believed there was 400,000 illegal immigrants in London. He wanted an amnesty so they would be given citizenship or a path to citizenship and they could remain, which would have created the first Boris wave. But he was blocked by Labour and the Conservatives at the time. So I think you've got to understand the mentality of these sort of plastic conservatives, is that mass immigration is part and parcel of the left of the Conservative Party, and that starts with Boris Johnson. And I'll just finish my point here, as you're talking about the worst Britons. I think Boris Johnson should be number one on the worst Briton list, because he completely, he conned us all. He lied to us, and he has completely undermined this country through mass uncontrolled immigration.
Oh, James. Okay, where do I go with that? I think the Boris legacy is more complicated than that. And I'll put this up to Mayuran, because here's the reality, Mayuran. Yes, without Nigel Farage, there would be no Brexit. But also without Boris Johnson, there would be no Brexit, because a populist figure was required to force Brexit through our despicable House of Commons, which had done everything to undermine that vote.
I can agree with you to an extent, Dan. I mean, the civil service, you had that most of Parliament were against Brexit. So he had to really bulldoze Brexit through an anti-democratic Parliament. So let's give him credit where credit's due. But to be honest with you, I kind of agree with James. I actually think there should be a hall of shame for Tory prime ministers, and Boris Johnson should be front and centre, along with Cameron, Theresa May, and Rishi Sunak. Because what's happened here, and why I'm so enraged by what Priti Patel said, is that there is a cultural assassination that has actually happened to this country. We talk about the economic value, I think it's 38 billion the Boris wave has caused us in terms of all the families and dependents that have come over until 2028 that we're going to have to pay for. But it's a crime against the British citizens. And that should haunt all the Tory and Conservative backbenchers and frontbenchers. And what I saw in Priti Patel was there wasn't this instinctive humility and apologetic nature. Now, people might say she had a bad interview, maybe she was prepped a little bit badly, but it should be instinctive. The gravity of what they've done to this country should be, there should be an instinctive guilt and an instinctive sense of apology. All of that should come instinctively. It shouldn't have to be prepped at all. And what I saw in Priti Patel was absolute indignation, stubbornness, obstinance, and defiance. And I think that is unforgivable. And, you know, culture takes thousands of years to develop, Dan. Takes thousands of years to develop, and it has been decimated by the likes of Boris, by Priti Patel, and I will never forgive them. And, you know, you saw in Parliament just now in the PMQs, there was one MP who kind of raised concerns about the ONS projections for a further population explosion over the next 7 years. And what did Keir Starmer do? He just battered him away and said, go and ask your leader. It means that on immigration, which is the #1 issue affecting this country, the Conservatives cannot offer opposition, let alone government. And that's why there should be a merger between Reform and the Tory party, I think. But it should be a merger that's based on a cannibalisation of the Conservatives by the Reform Party and by Nigel Farage.
Interesting. I really like that term, cultural assassination, because I think it does sum up the absolute horror of what we're facing. And I would argue a willful blindness, actually, from our leaders to just ignore it. and to demonize, by the way, folk like us and good ordinary Brits who are prepared to talk about it. James, what do you make of the fact that Starmer's now becoming even more anti-democratic and trying to cancel these local elections, another thing Nigel is furious about?
It's a really important point, but you've got to see the wider context. So I don't think these particular cancelling these particular elections is as important as the wider issues that they're going to gerrymander the boundaries of the new constituency or the new regional councils or whatever they're going to call them to be they'll be weighted in favour of Labour, of where Labour populations live, urban populations, and away from country people. So, you know, democracy, the whole point of a local democracy is that people can be involved, and if that feels representative, by creating these super councils or whatever they're going to do, government will be further away from local people and local issues. And so it's very important to highlight just not only is this anti-democratic, but it's very much gerrymandering the vote system or the system in their favour. And the second point is this is part of a wider package of giving votes to under 16s, giving votes to foreigners. We know that this year or in the next 2 years, a bill will be put forward before Parliament to enlarge in the franchise in order to dilute the vote of British people. They're giving votes to people under 16, even though you can join the military, but you can't go off to fight a war. You can't drink in a pub, but they want to give people the responsibility, people with no life experience, the opportunity to vote, because they believe those people will probably be gusting left and more likely to vote Labour. So this is part of a much bigger attack on Britain, undermining the foundations of our institutions, which of course, these undermining the foundations of Britain began in 1997 with the Human Rights Act, with the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005, making judicial activism the system whereby the government can do nothing. I mean, there's a whole package that started in 1997, and it's a continuation of that toxic legacy, the socialist Marxist legacy to destroy Britain.
Indeed, and we cannot let Britain be destroyed. Breaking right now, a major row has broken out over Piers Morgan's authoritarian tendencies during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Bev Turner and June Slater have taken the former Good Morning Britain presenter to task for what was inexcusable behaviour over the course of the pandemic, which included, by the way, advocating for those who refused the COVID vaccine to not receive treatment in the National Health Service for anything. Piers, who is now obviously an independent broadcaster, has a very big channel, spoke with Tucker Carlson to try and, I would argue, rewrite history.
Now, where I was completely wrong was, you mentioned COVID. And it was interesting. It really changed my thinking about these things. In COVID, I got very, I think, overly emotionally engaged because I knew people who were dying of COVID, and it was awful. And in Britain, we handled it very badly. But I got led down a line which I wished I hadn't been led down. I'll give an example. When the scientists said, if you have the vaccine, you can't transmit the virus, I believed them. And I became wrongly censorious, really badly censorious. I was saying to people, if you don't have it now, knowing that if you have it, you can't transmit the virus, you're going to go and kill old people, you're going to kill people. It's not about you, it's about the people you may infect and kill. And it turned out to be completely wrong. They later said, months and months later, actually, there's no difference whether you have the vaccine or not in terms of transmitting the virus. And at that point, I realized I'd been misled completely.
Had you already gotten the vaccine?
Yeah.
Did you know that it made you impotent when you got it? I'd heard that. Is that not?
That's not true.
It's not true.
I can confirm that's not true.
Oh.
But here's my point. Though.
Such a dick. I can't control myself.
No, but that's why I like you. That's why we get on so well. But the interesting point about both of them was that we were both kind of traduced by institutions into taking a position about something which turned out to be wrong.
Oh yeah.
And it really has made me, I just think coming out of the pandemic in particular, I've just now, next time round with any of these things,
yes,
I'm going to be a lot more skeptical, as a journalist should be.
Yes.
So I'm pretty ashamed of.
And look, I guess it's always good when people admit they got it wrong. But the problem is, the way that Piers got that wrong actually had huge implications for the way that the British government dealt with lockdowns. Part of the reason that we are so catastrophically suffering as a country was because of the hysteria from that period. And by the way, if you were smart, if you were a good journalist, it was very easy to fight back against the narrative. I certainly did every single day of 2020, using my position in the mainstream media to try and bring some balance, even though so many folk wanted to cancel me for it. And my friend Bev Turner was totally cancelled by the mainstream media over that period, and she is not accepting Piers's weasel words today.
I've got to respond to Piers Morgan talking to Tucker Carlson about the fact that he now realises that he should be ashamed of how wrong he got the pandemic, particularly in relation to pushing vaccines on healthy people. He talks about the fact that he lacked scepticism and was emotionally involved. That's not true. It wasn't a lack of scepticism. It was willful ignorance. It was willful blindness. He knew, the people he worked with knew that I had another opinion on that situation, what we now know as the truth, scientific fact. He didn't want to talk to me during that period of time. In fact, just to demonstrate how little scepticism he still has, he blocked me on X, on Twitter, and he still has me blocked. Because anybody that disagreed with him, he blocked. And still does during that period of time. So don't buy this whole, I lack scepticism. Because if there is another pandemic, which there will be, this is what Piers Morgan will do. He will lick his finger, he will hold it in the wind, and he will wait to see which way public opinion is blowing, because that is what broadcasters like him do. It is not about truth or integrity or values. It is about popularity. Which is why now he's doing this pivot and going on all these shows, and he knows that Tucker Carlson fans and Joe Rogan fans know that he was wrong, and he's desperately trying to get himself back in the favour with the public, having lost his Talk TV show and now only being online. So it's all rubbish. Don't buy it. Nothing's changed. Piers Morgan, if you genuinely are now more sceptical, more curious, give me a call. You know you can get my number. I can tell you stuff about the last 4 years that will blow your tiny mind. Let's see how curious you really are.
And I'd like to see that, actually. I think Piers Morgan, if he's serious about this, should unblock Bev Turner and host her on Uncensored. But it is really just worth remembering how Piers allowed his woke ITV show Good Morning Britain to turn into government propaganda. I mean, look at actually how they broadcast over that period. In the background, every single day, they had the rainbow flag with a heart that said, NHS, we love you. June Slater, a good friend of mine, also furious about this.
So Piers Morgan is bleating on Tucker Carlson about how he got the pandemic wrong and he's sorry and he lacks scepticism. You didn't lack scepticism, you turned your back on knowledge. You followed one side of the science, you followed the government narrative. There was always a counter-narrative, and it was offered up to you by people like Bev Turner, a fine journalist who stood by the courage of her convictions and lost her job because she was trying to put the truth out at the time. And what did you do? You basically talked about the unvaccinated like they were unclean. You, an investigative journalist, turned your back on information that would have given people a more balanced approach instead of the profit-driven narrative. If we had more Bev Turners than what we had Piers Morgans, a lot of people made a lot of different decisions because they would have had a full picture of what this drug was really capable of and what it lacked.
Let me bring in my superstar panel, Mayuran Senthilnathan, Reform UK star, former Brexit Party MEP, James Glancy. Mayuran, where do you stand on this one? Do you accept Piers's apology today?
Well, I wouldn't even call it an apology, because if you look at his language, he's playing the victim even in his apology. He's saying, I was led. That's the language he's using. So I don't really buy that at all. But I mean, there are two types of people. There are some people who are perhaps, let's say, naively trusted the government when it came down to lockdowns, etc., because they thought that was just a nice thing and the proper thing to do in a pandemic and an emergency situation. But there were other people who not only trusted the government, saw this as a kind of tribal, religious form of extremism, where, you know, being pro-vax, being pro-lockdown was a kind of extremist position to take. And that's what Piers Morgan represents. And he used that extremist position to talk down to, as June was saying, the unvaccinated as dirty peasants, impure people who should be dehumanized and denied rights. And all that's happened now is, during the post-COVID situation, the lights have come on, the music stopped, and he's realized he's got no clothes on. And in a kind of post-Trumpian situation, we see Mark Zuckerberg changing his perspective on free speech. You know that Piers Morgan's going it alone. He has to kind of tout for the same kind of people that Joe Rogan appeals to, and so that's where he's coming at with this situation. He's like Bev Turner said, he's putting his finger in the wind, seeing where public opinion is going, where his career is going, and that's why he's saying the rhetoric he's saying at the moment.
Exactly. It is commercially motivated. And the problem is, and the big problem that I have, is that the hysterical coverage driven by the mainstream media during the COVID pandemic, a lot of it was commercially motivated. So, for example, I want to remind people, let's just take a look at this picture of a particular interview that Piers conducted with one of the government ministers at the time, Therese Coffey. Now, she actually hung up. But look at the propaganda just in this one screenshot. So you have the coronavirus pandemic image suggesting that it's getting everywhere, forced quarantine for arrivals as if that is a good thing. And then in the bottom right, an actual ticking clock of how many people had been vaccinated. James Glancy, do you feel like this is genuine from Piers?
Well, I was one of the mugs to get vaccinated with Moderna. I've been very, very fit and healthy as a former Royal Marine all my life. I still train. I got this pleurisy on the lungs, and when I saw the doctor, he said, it's really strange. Lots of men your age who are fit seem to be getting all sorts of weird things that we don't understand. So we were definitely forced into it. So I believe Piers, I like Piers, fellow Arsenal fan. I talked to him on a few issues from time to time. He says he got a motive. And he let emotion take control, and he did become part of the problem. He was wrong. But I would say this, you've got to understand what the government did to us. There's a unit called the Research Information Centre, RIC, at the heart of government. It's a propaganda unit to try and control the public narrative. It did it during the Southport riots. It does it to try and control what people think. And they use narrative, and they corralled a number of social media organizations to frighten us to stay at home, to frighten us to get the vaccination. So I think there needs to be a wider investigation into government propaganda, because the government and the scientists got it wrong, and then they forced this narrative upon us. And I think if you think back to the wars that we've been forced into Iraq, for example, it's funny how the government creates a narrative, then the mainstream media comes alongside and they put all this pressure on people to say, this is the right thing. You're unpatriotic if you didn't support the war. And they use the same methods through the mainstream media, through their propaganda channels, this research information center, to develop a narrative. And if you fall foul of that, it'll be destructive for your life, and they make it so. So I think this is the wider narrative. We need an investigation into government propaganda.
Oh, well, we absolutely do. I couldn't agree more. But the thing is, the mainstream media were culpable for being the propaganda arm. So take a look at this picture here. So this shows you exactly what the government did over that period. Look at that. All of the regional newspapers from Swindon to Liverpool to Oxford to Brighton all ran a coordinated front page. And guess who paid for that? Guess who paid for that? The British government. And the British government was bankrolling all of these media organisations. These media organisations saw record ratings because everyone was sitting at home. So what else did you have to do? And I know, because I was broadcasting on Talk Radio, the drive time slot, during that entire year, 2020. And we were like a lifeline to people on Talk Radio, because the rest of the media was all about propaganda at all times. So at least we tried to break down that propaganda. But let me tell you, at great personal cost, that Tory MP, Neil O'Brien, he led a personal smear campaign against great journalists who were challenging the narrative, like Julia Hartley-Brewer and like Alison Pearson. So, as I think you say, Myron, it's not good enough at the moment what we're getting from people like Piers. There has to be more responsibility for what you cause. And actually, when you look at the climate of what's happened this week, Myron, for example, the inevitable closure of Sly News, which is saying that they are going to be moving online only by 2030, if they even last that long. I think a lot of it harks back to the two big issues of our day, Brexit, which we obviously spoke about earlier, but also COVID. Because think about Sly News, for example. They were propagating this idea that everyone should stay home and follow the rules. And then their own presenters who were leading the FAIR campaign, Kay Burley and Beth Rigby, were actually partying it up, living it up, quaffing champagne, not following the rules themselves. They just happened to get caught because of pesky photographers. So I think it shows that the entire elite class over this period of time were not on the side of the people. And we will not forget it. And it is partly behind the huge move to Reform UK. But I think it's also why the MSM is dying this slow, painful death.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing across the country is the insurgence of Reform UK. You're seeing other parties across Europe surging up. So there's this whole kind of desperation, a lamentation almost from the populace of Britain and Europe and America to say we want something different. We want to tear down the establishment. And that's what Reform represents. It's what all these other parties, and it's what Trump represents. And Trump, look, for all his rhetoric, some of it perhaps inappropriate at times, what he's doing is, for example, with JFK, the JFK files, he's going to declassify them. The Epstein list are probably going to get released. What we're seeing is finally transparency. What we're seeing is, and when you see Donald Trump signing those executive orders, I was euphoric because it was actually democracy, the will of the people being exercised right before your eyes, the will of the people manifesting in policy, in reality. And that's what we're all yearning for. There has been such a huge democratic deficit with the COVID lockdowns, with the constitutional quangos that go on in Parliament. All of these things, there is such a yearning to actually just get the will of the people exercised. And Donald Trump is the beginning of that. And I hope to see a massive tremor across Britain and Europe, which will actually make that happen there as well.
Please God. And how astonishing, Myron, actually, that we are so excited about a leader who just does what they promised. But it is so refreshing. It is so wonderful. All of these people moaning about what Trump's doing at the moment. He warned you. He told you. This was part of his policy. He's not going off piste. And unfortunately, we have had politicians in the UK who have told us that they were going to cut net migration, for example, for decades, and they have done the total opposite, and it is disgraceful.
Dan, can I say,
please,
just very quickly, the information campaign used during COVID was the same. They did that for Brexit. They got all the institutions, all the media. It's the same methodology telling us we're idiots, you don't know what you're talking about. And it turns out that we do. And they lied. They said the economy would immediately crash at $500,000. They lied, and they will continue
instant
to lie.
recession. Yeah, exactly. Project Fair. And then COVID was Project Fair Part 2. Breaking right now, an extraordinary row has broken out between the Vice President of the United States of America, J.D. Vance, a really important guy, and arguably two of the least important people in British politics, Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, who host the centrist dad lefty podcast Rest is Politics. So Inevitable West summed this up quite nicely, and since then the story has gone viral. Let me take you through it. So as Calgie from the Daily Express explained, the Vice President of the free world taking time out of his day to drag the rest of politics here for it. So it all started off from this interview, and by the way, JD Vance is doing the most incredible interviews at the moment where he just rips into his mainstream media protagonists. And it started with this particular interview. Watch.
But there's this old school, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that. They seem to hate the citizens of their own country and care more about people outside their own borders. That is no way to run a society. And I think the profound difference that Donald Trump brings to the leadership of this country is the simple concept, America first. It doesn't mean you hate anybody else. It means that you have leadership, and President Trump has been very clear about this, that puts the interests of American citizens first. In the same way that the British Prime Minister should care about Brits and the French should care about the French, we have an American president who cares primarily about Americans, and that's a very welcome change.
What is President Xi doing? What is Vladimir Putin
He's looking after the Chinese. Putin is looking after the Russians. They're entitled to do that. Thank God we now have an American president who's looking after the citizens of his own country.
And Rory Stewart, remember, is the guy who bet £100,000, or at least said he was going to bet £100,000 on Kamala Harris winning the White House because he was just so confident no one would be so stupid to elect Trump and JD Vance. So he posted, in response to that interview, a bizarre take on John, less Christian and more pagan tribal. We should start worrying when politicians become theologians, assumed to speak for Jesus and tell us in which order to love. JD Vance, and this is where it gets shocking. Okay, this is not normal. I know we have X rows all the time. But JD Vance, the Vice President of the USA in office, decides to respond directly to Rory Stewart. And he writes, just Google Auto Amoris. Aside from that, the idea that there isn't a hierarchy of obligations violates basic common sense. Does Rory really think his moral duties to his own children are the same as his duties to a stranger who lives thousands of miles away? Does anyone? I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The problem with Rory and people like him is that he has an IQ of 110 and thinks he has an IQ of 130. This false arrogance drives so much elite failure over the last 40 years. And oh my goodness, he is right, because in that tweet, let's think about it. JD Vance could be talking about George Osborne. He could be talking about David Cameron. He could be talking about Tony Blair. Actually, he could be talking about any centrist dad that has destroyed the UK that we love. Alistair Campbell, however, decided to make it all about poor him. Very odd that the Vice President of the USA has nothing better to do than troll my podcast partner. Perhaps he has not been given a proper job by the narcissist in chief. Charlie Peters from GB News responded to that, saying you can't dismiss a cutting takedown as trolling just because it's your mate getting cooked. And Toby Young of the Free Speech Union agreed, saying he's not trolling Rory Stewart. He's responding to a criticism Rory made of him. If JD Vance is engaging, you should welcome that, not sneer that he doesn't have better things to do. Play the ball, not the man. My superstar panel with me, James Glancy and Mayuran Senthilnathan. Mayuran, I mean, look, I have mixed views on this because obviously I completely agree with JD Vance, and his summation of the centrist dads who have destroyed the West was just spot on, just absolutely perfect. At the same time, I'm a bit like, you just know Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart love this.
Yeah, but what JD Vance is doing is he's highlighting the profound difference between those who believe in the nation state and sovereignty, and it's a Brexit day today, so that's quite appropriate, and the globalists. And so these are two different paradigms that we find ourselves in. And our politicians, in part, who are being kind of governing the situation, are globalists. But JD Vance, he really brings up a really profound point that exposes the psyche of the globalists by invoking Christian theology, actually. And what he says is, to actually love humanity, or I want to, change the world, that's an idea. That's a fantasy. But the person next to you is a reality. Your family is a reality. Your community is a reality. Your fellow countrymen is a reality. And if you can't love them and put them first, what on earth are you doing running off to try and fix the globe. Right? It makes no sense. And this comes back to what Jordan Peterson has also said. Tidy up your room before you try and fix the perils of the world. Right? It's just a simple understanding that Rory Stewart doesn't understand, and it exposes the sheer delusional, ungrounded arrogance of pursuing this fantasy of globalization. We will serve the world. We will fix climate change. We will solve the poverty of other nations. But while we got 50,000 people dying in corridors in A&E, while potentially 4,000 pensioners will die because of their winter fuel allowance being taken away from them. You know, that's the situation we're in. And JD Vance has just completely exposed them for what they are.
What did you make of it, James?
There's two really important points. I'd say one, do not engage with these two narcissists, Rory.
Yeah.
I'm annoyed at Vance for giving them up.
I sort of agree.
But he said something interesting. He said, you know, every leader, it's their job to put the interests of their nation first. Well, not Keir Starmer. Just like the QC Philip Sands, who's representing Mauritius to take British sovereign territory, the Chagos, of Britain, who's also happens to be Starmer's mate. Keir Starmer doesn't put the interests of Britain first. He puts international law first. He puts responsibilities to climate change before the British interests. So we need a bit of what Vance is talking about, putting the British national interest. Not a bit of that. We need that in its entirety, because that's what's been missing since 1997. People putting the British national interest first.
Can I just add, Dan?
Yes, please do.
It's not just statesmen that are doing this. It's actually law that is doing this. Human rights law actually puts the global citizen ahead of the British citizen. And that's the reason why, even if you have politicians who are well-meaning, they're going to struggle against our constitution that is pitted against the British citizen itself. And that's what we need to fix.
Yeah, well, we do. And getting rid of the HRA, the Supreme Court, restoration of the British Constitution pre-1997 is the only way to put the national interest first. That's a big piece of work that the right is going to have to deal with and get ourselves ready for 2029.
Exactly. It is a fundamental difference. I totally agree. However, at the same time, there is just that little part of me that thinks you're completely right, James. Don't engage, JD. This empowers them. One of the things where the left is quite effective sometimes is just ignoring folk on the right who they don't want to give a voice to. I think maybe sometimes we should do the same thing. By the way, I should say, if you do want to follow some real independent media, James is now on Substack, Outpost Films, right, James? And your brilliant documentary on Afghanistan is there, and I am recommending Outpost on my Substack, so you can find it via that, www.outspoken.live. But James Glancy and Mayuran Senthilnathan do stand by. In just 1 minute, this fascinating story about whether a taxi driver has a right to turn down a lift from a morbidly obese woman. She says not, and she's suing. So what does that say about our society today? And don't go anywhere, by the way. There's some incredible videos connected to this story. But first, the reason you're watching this show is because you know that these days it's almost impossible to trust the mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to patrol social media. And that's for a very good reason, given the Brexit debate, COVID debacle, and demonisation of Donald Trump. But I have the solution. Today's sponsor, Ground News, was created by a former NASA engineer to provide you with the only safe way to consume the headlines. So you can go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out for yourself. But what I want to do now is show you this incredible website and app in action. So what we're going to do is take the recent story, you will have heard us talk about it on the show, Elon Musk falling out with Nigel Farage all over Tommy Robinson, the political prisoner. The left-wing legacy media tried to whip this up and destroy all three men. But what's great when you look at the story on Ground News, and you can do this, by the way, with any story in the news, not just this one, but this is just one example. So Ground News has collated the 230 sources in one place. It then instantly shows how the story is being covered by the media, broken down by whether those organizations lean to the left or right. It's called its bias distribution service. Then you can see every article about the topic broken down by the political position and ownership of the publication. So in this case, it shows that Fox News, an outlet on the right, gave a fair analysis, whereas the likes of Mediaite and The Independent on the left didn't, which isn't a surprise, I guess. But what's so great about this app and website is that Ground News gets to know you personally, providing you with news stories you're interested in. You can choose lots of different categories like Brexit or Donald Trump or Premier League football. But it also analyzes your own biases and comes up with potential blind spots that you might not be hearing about. So I know you love the news. That's why you're watching Outspoken. But you probably don't trust the legacy media. Ground News gives you the tools to understand the truth about what is really going on in the world. I can speak personally and say it's now the only way I read the news. I have the app on my phone. It allows me to see through media bias and manipulative narratives without having to rely on the MSM to define what is true. So go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. You can subscribe through my link for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. Ground News is all subscriber funded. For less than a Netflix subscription, actually. It means you can get all the world's news in one place and think for yourself. It truly has been a real game changer, I guess, for a news junkie like me. So let me repeat the address. ground.news/outspoken, or you can use the QR code on screen if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. And the description is the link is in the description in the show notes below. But now, back to the show. Breaking right now, an extraordinary row has broken out between the obese American rapper Dank DeMoss and a Lyft taxi driver. Let me take you through the story as reported by The Sun. A plus-size rapper has sued American taxi service Lyft after claiming a driver refused to pick her up over fears she could burst his tyres. Humiliated, that's the words of The Sun, Dank DeMoss, real name Dajua Blandine, who was 36, recorded her heated argument with the Lyft driver on whether she could fit into his vehicle. Now, she's now suing the driver, and she's loving all of the publicity, but after this video overnight of Dank DeMoss falling off a stage during a performance, perhaps the taxi driver had a point. But Dank DeMoss doesn't think so. Watch this.
Blanding tells us she was just trying to get to a Detroit Lions watch party this month when her Lyft rolled up.
As I'm walking, I see him like making faces or whatever. I'm like, oh man.
She already knew.
I can fit in this car.
But believe me, you can.
Yes, I can.
Believe it.
He told her there's not enough room in his car.
The kicker part was when he started to talk about his tires. You know, I feel like that was a slap in the face. That was like my tires, you know, like.
The driver said his tires could not handle her weight.
For every big person you turn down because they can't fit in your car?
Yeah, because they need to order the Uber XL instead.
No, I don't never have to order Uber XL.
He apologized, canceled the ride, and left her there. The rapper says she's pretty tough.
I get the money and flip it and make some food.
Dank DeMoss, as she's known at the mic, is crushed by the whole situation.
I just want them to know, like, it really hurt my feelings.
It looks like Lyft might be hurting pretty soon, too.
I knew it was illegal, and I knew that it was wrong.
Her attorneys, John Marco and Zach Runyon, say weight is a protected characteristic in Michigan by law.
It would be no different than a driver pulling up and saying, you know, I don't want to have black people in my car, or I don't want to have Christians in my car, or Muslims in my car. It's the same. Under the law, it's the same.
The lawsuit is filed. Since she posted the encounter on social media, other full-figured folks have reached out saying the same thing happened to them.
But Alex Armstrong tweeted on this, do you think this driver was right to refuse to take her in his car? She has now sued the ride-sharing company Lyft with her lawyer, calling the decision not to accept her as segregation. So let me bring in my superstar panel, Reform UK's Mayuran Senthilnathan and James Glancy, the conservationist TV presenter and former Brexit Party MEP. Mayuran, should weight, should being morbidly obese be a protected characteristic just like your ethnicity or your religion or your sex?
Short answer is no. I just don't see how it can be. Look, perhaps there's an argument if you have an extreme medical condition and there's just no way out. Potentially, there's an argument there. But aside from that, I don't see how being morbidly obese could be a protected characteristic. And I was surprised to hear that that's the case in the state. I mean, this driver, I think the tyres argument was a bit of a red herring. I think that was his just a desperate attempt to try and get to dissuade her from coming in. But I think the principle of the taxi driver having his own car and that car is his livelihood, he should get to choose, as long as it's not discriminatory against immutable characteristics such as ethnicity or disability or something like that. He should be able to choose who comes in and out of his car. It's his business, it's his car. And I think the autonomy lies with him. I appreciate there's an argument of sensitivity towards her feelings and the fact of leaving a woman, potentially stranded as well. That's another argument to her side. But I do think overall, I don't think the legal case will go in his favour, but I do think overall in principle, he should have the autonomy to decide who goes into his car.
James, do you agree?
No, actually. I do think if you turn up, unless somebody's horrendously drunk or violent, that you should take them. The tyre thing's nonsense. He could have put the seat forward. I mean, how often do you turn up? You haven't told the driver, the Uber or the Lyft driver, you've got a big bag, and they just kind of usually make it happen for you. So I do think she's been discriminated against there. I don't think she should sue for it. I think she's right to highlight it. But I also am massively against societal acceptance of morbid obesity and the normalization of it, because it is incredibly dangerous for the individual. It's a huge burden on society. So I think there's a number of issues here. There is a discrimination issue, but she shouldn't accept that, and she shouldn't accept that it's acceptable to be at that weight and not doing something about it.
But if you take the discrimination argument, James, where does this end? Because the new movement amongst morbidly obese social media influencers like her is for airline companies to be forced to reserve 2 seats for someone like that.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dan. So what I'm saying is practically he could have got her in. If practically you can't fit into a normal size seat, then you should have to pay for 2 seats. It shouldn't be up to the airline, because that's a lifestyle choice. If she hasn't got a medical reason, it's a lifestyle choice. So that's what I'm saying is airlines are not discriminating against people. They're just being practical. But I'm saying he could have got her in the car and he made an excuse. And I think you just got to be really practical about this. Being fat shouldn't be a protected characteristic. But he turned up, didn't like the look at her, thought, I don't want that in my car, and I can't be bothered. And I think that is wrong. But I do maintain airlines, if you're too big to get in a seat, buy a second seat.
I think we should distinguish between 2 kinds of principles here, because I agree with James that if he'd been more of a gentleman, he could have made an exception. He could have put the seat forward. He could have got her into a car. I think he probably could have done that. However, I think the principle is he should be able to decide, as long as it's not discriminating against immutable characteristics, he should be able to decide who goes in and out of his car.
The thing is, we are starting as a society, aren't we, to fetishize obesity.
Not me. It's idiots. I'm going to the gym after this.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right, Dan. I mean, the kind of supersized models and this kind of it's this movement away from it's my rights and not my responsibility, rights versus responsibility argument. And people seem to be heavily invested in their sense of these are my rights. I can do what I want. I deserve this. I deserve that. Rather than I have to serve society. I have to look after myself. There is a sense of responsibility I have to my health, to myself, to my family, and so on. So that's the kind of philosophical argument that I think is at play with the kind of, as you said, the potential fetishizing of being fat or morbidly obese.
Yeah, because
Dan, do you remember on the tube? There was a picture of a woman in a bikini advertising a protein shake, probably the best advert ever, my favorite ever commute, and they banned it for saying it's over sexualizing women. You know, it's obviously I don't understand it, but they banned it. But now, as you say, they are sort of putting forward plus size models as if it's acceptable. We've totally turned the 80s and the 90s, the golden years of Britain, on its head.
Oh, it was. Take us back. I always say at the moment, take me back to the 1990s. I'd be so much happier. Look, my view on this is that I think it's absolute bullshit that people like her are happy to look like that. I'm someone who's battled with my weight my entire life. So I'm certainly not trying to be horrible to people who are morbidly obese. I've been there. I understand how hard it is. It is a constant battle for someone like me. I reckon, looking at you, Mayuran, and looking at you, James, yes, you're very healthy people, but some people are more genetically blessed than others. However, I'm not making excuses, and trust me, no one likes being overweight. No one likes it. So this body positivity movement is total bullshit because you're trying to pretend that you're happy about something that you're not. Why would you choose to look like this? Why would Cosmopolitan highlight someone like Tess Holliday as a supermodel roaring, saying that she wants the haters to kiss her ass, when deep down she's clearly not happy? No one is happy to be overweight. I'm sorry, I just don't buy it.
No, I think that's a great point, Dan. I think the media, magazines, whatever it is, they are forcing people to believe a lie about themselves. They're forcing people to override their own feelings and self-worth about themselves and to buy in and invest into a myth that is being created. So it's an illusory myth that they're being forced to or compelled to invest in. And that's a really good point, that it's no one is really happy being overweight. It's unhealthy. You can't move as quickly or as agile. You probably might struggle to get a partner potentially. All of these things are there. And to perpetuate that and to say this is great, this is something we should be all even aspiring for, is potentially not only not true, it's potentially dangerous.
Yep, totally. And that's why I think let's celebrate someone like Lizzo if we're looking at the media industry, the music industry, rather than Dank DeMoss, because Lizzo, who was the queen really of this body to positivity movement, has realized, actually, no, this wasn't good. And she's got fit. She's got healthy. She's still a bigger woman. We have different genetics, but I think that's a much more positive message, actually, than Dank DeMoss, who doesn't need to be that size, doesn't need to pick a battle. I would say for Dank DeMoss, that needs to be one of the wake-up call moments in your life. And it comes back to this idea, doesn't it, James, of personal responsibility. And we all need some of that. So yes, I agree. Probably a taxi driver shouldn't leave a woman alone, but I would use something like that happening as an opportunity to change, to be better, to lose some weight. Don't allow that to happen to me again. Instead, we have this world of social media influencers clashing with a world of victimization. And I think we are creating people who use these moments to become victims, and it's not a good thing. But absolutely fascinating debate. Thank you so much to my superstar panel, Reform UK rising star Mayuran Senthilnathan, former Brexit Party MEP James Glancy. Make sure you subscribe to Outpost Studios on Substack, and I hope to see you both back on Outspoken very soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now, of course, it is Friday. And this week, I marked the return of Greatest Britain Union Jackass. It was one of the most popular features on my former GB News show. I have the rights to it. It is now back on Outspoken every day. But what I want to do at the end of the week on Friday is run a mega poll taking the winners of Union Jackass from earlier in the week to find who is the worst Briton in the world this week. And the nominees were, actually, let's just go to the results. Let's go to the results and I'll take you through them. But I could not believe this. 36,000 votes. Just incredible. You are incredible. What an amazing community you are in Outspoken. And the results are Peter Mandelson, just 3%. That was for his U-turn on Donald Trump. I would have had him higher than that. David Looney Lammy for caring more about countries in the third world rather than the UK, 5%. Rachel from Accounts Reeves, 9% from her speech promoting growth, which clearly won't promote any growth. But it was overwhelming and I guess appropriate that he is the first winner of the worst Britain in the world this week. Keir Slippery Starmer with 84%. Holy moly. But don't worry, Greatest Britain Union Jackass returns next week. I think maybe sometimes, guys, I'm going to have to be a little bit creative and we're all going to have to use our thinking caps, because I think what I've realised is that any time Keir Starmer is nominated, he's going to win in a landslide, and we're going to have some fun with it. So maybe until he does something really bad again, we'll let him sit this one out. But yeah, amazing. I'm just blown away. 36,000 of you voted on that poll the first time we've had it, which is just incredible. So thank you. What an amazing return for Greatest Britain and Union Jackass this week. And it is back on Monday. Don't go anywhere though, because coming up in the Uncancelled After Show on Substack, even Netflix now roasting Prince Harry and Meghan. Our Royal Mastermind Angela Levin here with the latest on what is a very awkward development for the troubled ex-royals. Also, I'm going to show you the most delightful video of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, back at work and proving why she's probably the royal family's greatest assets. This is honestly the cutest video you will see in a long time. So what we do at this stage is come off YouTube and Rumble. We move to our own platform on Substack, www.outspoken.live. What an incredible week it has been. Thank you for your company throughout the week. I do return 5 p.m. UK time, Monday. That's midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure you subscribe if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. And most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you. Have a wonderful weekend. Try and get some time to chill. I know I'm going to. And we'll see you on the after show, though, I hope, on Substack in just one moment with Angela Levin.